What's up, YouTube? It's time for a review of the new Kreator record, Gods of Violence, out this past Friday, January 27th. Without a doubt, my most anticipated release of January 2017. This was the first album that I knew for a fact that I was going to be reviewing this year ever since they announced it back in October. You know, when people talk about thrash metal and talk about the big four, the inevitable discussion that always happens is, well, who are the bands that are the next big four? Who are the bands that deserve the 5, 6, 7, 8 slots if 1, 2, 3, and 4 are always going to be Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax? And it's always the same shit. Well, I think Testament. I just think they're so underrated and they never get their due. Well, what about Exodus? They were there since day one. Can't forget Overkill. Don't forget about the East Coast. It's not just a West Coast thing. And I'm just sitting in the middle, like, what about Kreator, you fucking morons? Like, Kreator's mid to late 80s output goes toe-to-toe with all of those bands, and in a way it stands out because there was a noticeable extreme metal edge to untouchable records like Pleasure to Kill and my personal favorite, the really underrated Extreme Aggression. Like, Kreator, when you think about it, on those records had practically as much in common with Death and Possessed as they did with Slayer and Exodus. Their shit was just a whole other level of heaviness. But you know, it seems like with the passage of time, at least I like to think, there aren't many thrash fans out there who overlook Kreator's significance. And I think the buzz for this new record, Gods of Violence, really shows that people care, that people are excited to hear new Kreator music, especially given the fact that this is, not only is this the longest gap in studio albums ever in the band's discography, but since the last couple of records, Phantom Antichrist and Hordes of Chaos, were well received. And Gods of Violence doesn't waste a whole lot of time before it goes on the offensive, so to speak. We've got our obligatory militant intro track, and then we launch right into the phenomenal opener, World War Now. This is a song that's very riff-centric. You've got that initial riff, which really rhythmically is a classic thrash attack, but the chords have a slightly evil black metal tinge to them because they're strummed in full as opposed to those chunky two-note power chords that characterize a lot of thrash metal. And later on, the riff becomes that much more powerful when frontman Miller Petroza vocally uses his syllables to perfectly sync up with and accentuate the riff. You also then have that super catchy riff that happens before the verse starts, and you have the verse riff itself, both of which have that hooky single note thing going on, which of course a lot of American metalcore bands have watered down. But you almost forget that bit of context here because Kreator execute it so well and make it sound fresh and exciting and invigorating. And the song takes a couple different turns from here. The chorus mixes real aggressive stop-start double bass drums with enormous twin guitars, which as a listener creates this really interesting mix of emotions because you're really charged up by the pounding rhythms, but the twin guitars have this almost brooding quality to them, which is then amplified in the post-chorus section, which to me is the undeniable climax of the song, with these textural acoustic guitars and a lead guitar harmony line that sounds like the soundtrack to some sort of tragedy. This song, for the opener of a thrash record, casts a pretty wide emotional net, and I was really impressed with its depth. And then from here, it of course won't be a surprise to fans who have heard their last record, Phantom Antichrist, but Gods of Violence is not, in general, is not just like an all-out thrash fest, because it draws a significant amount of influence from melodic death metal, particularly in the riffing. You know, the riffs in a song like Side by Side can really be traced back to early At the Gates and early In Flames, although, you know, the circle of influence, I'm sure Kreator influenced those bands, but still. Then on the back end of this record, you can definitely spot some old school new wave of British heavy metal influences, like in the pre-chorus to the song Lion with Eagle Wings. And then, you know, I don't want to come off as lazy in this comparison, but the umbrella subgenre, which is not really a subgenre at all, but the label of Viking metal definitely comes to mind. It inevitably comes to mind with songs like Side by Side, and especially the song Hail to the Hordes, which really fully embraces an Amon Amarth-esque sound. Which the reference is ultimately logical because Amon Amarth stuff is often a mix of melodic death metal and huge, triumphant new wave of British heavy metal melodies. And those are two elements that are all over this record, especially in the moments where thrash takes a bit of a back seat. And in addition to dabbling with some different styles, Kreator also do a fantastic job of bringing the mood down occasionally with some soft acoustic guitar passages like the intro to the title track, which has a slight exotic tinge over it. And you may not have noticed this, but it actually shares a note pattern, a very distinct note pattern with the intro to Metallica's Fade to Black. So skip to 9 seconds for that one. I mean, I don't have perfect pitch, but I'm 99% sure that's like the same exact pattern, which was just interesting to catch. And some other instances of effective mood swings are, of course, that epic post-chorus section in World War Now that I already mentioned. There's the intro to Lion with Eagle Wings, and there's the intro to the 7.5-minute closer, Death Becomes My Light, which this song also features in the middle this slowed down, moody, spacious guitar solo that makes it that much more dynamic. Death Becomes My Light is definitely a favorite of mine. When that sort of gothic intro ends and the main groove kicks in, it just sounds like every triumphant moment in my life and every success I've ever had compiled into one riff. It's just this explosion of positive energy. And the lyrics to this track are interesting too. Seemingly, what happens in this song is the narrator is on his deathbed and is finding joy and peace in leaving what he sees as this like horrific, really apocalyptic world. But what happens, I think, is that he doesn't actually die and he has to return to this world, which ultimately is the most hellish consequence and hellish punishment of all. It's an interesting concept. So I've addressed all the more dynamic elements of this record, but the greatness of Gods of Violence is ultimately in its thrashiest, most uncompromising moments. Like the absolute pinnacle of this album, and really by extension this genre, is the song Army of Storms. Holy shit. The first time I heard this, I'll never forget the first time hearing this song. I had my monitor set up in my living room and I was just kind of like laying on the couch, like having a kind of a passive first listen. And the first time I heard that crushing post-chorus section with that galloping double bass shit, I was actually worried that my skull had burst open. It shouldn't be legal. That's how heavy it was. The song Totalitarian Terror, of course, is another all-out thrasher where, again, you can find in the chorus, you can find the vocal syllables and the riff just syncing up perfectly to just bash the rhythms into you. And the lyrics in the bridge of this song are really cool too. When all the flags turn red and all the hearts turn black, the bridges have collapsed, the darkness lights the stars. That's just a hell of a visual. Gods of Violence is not a perfect album though, unfortunately. There's definitely a bunch of stuff that I'm not exactly gaga over. The chorus to the song Satan is Real being one of them. When metal becomes like a real life manifestation of its stereotypes, I tend to get really turned off. So this chorus, this repetitive chorus, just where it says Satan is real over and over again, doesn't really sit well with me. Neither does the generic triplet chug in the verses to this song. And in general, the second half of this album is not nearly as strong as the first half. A song like Fallen Brother on the back end of this album, that's a song I don't really care for. It's got very stiff, underwhelming riffs in it. And there's also Hail to the Hordes and Side by Side, which are all right, but for my taste, they drag things a bit too far to the left of Kreator's strengths, which mostly involve putting on a thrash clinic. But overall, Gods of Violence once again proves my point about Kreator. I like it better than the last Metallica record. I definitely like it better than the last Slayer record. It's better than the last Exodus album. It's better than the last Death Angel album. It edges out the last Testament album too. They're at the top of the heap in this genre. But as I've explained, it's not really that modern Kreator record that closely adheres to the band's classic sound. If you're looking for that, that record came out in 2009 and is called Hordes of Chaos. But if you want to hear a legendary thrash band put a modern, more melodic twist on the genre, then you should find a lot to dig here. Gods of Violence gets an 8 out of 10 from me. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, or shoot me a message so we can continue to talk music. And I'll see you guys soon.